Hello, I'm Luke, the Hard Times Guy. Today I'm going to talk to you about a place called Hergett, Arkansas. And I'm going to put this video into the what they call that playlist called Craighead County. Hergett, Arkansas is a little blink and you miss it place about halfway between Jonesboro and Truman, Arkansas. If you go there today, there is absolutely nothing there. Just a stretch of highway between two signs along the road that say Hergett. I don't know why they even got signs there because that's all I got. Little blue, little green sign about like that says Hergett. You pass it, and before before it's even out of the rearview mirror, there's another one facing the other way says Hergett. It was a little bit more significant place than that when I was a boy, and I got a lot of fond memories from there, and some other kinds of memories, and so I'm just going to share some of them with you today because part of them are significant as it relates to my family, and even those that aren't are maybe interesting. My dad's oldest brother's name was John Wesley Mooneyham. We all called him Wesley. He was Uncle Wesley to me. He owned a farm there in Hergett. There was a grocery store there, and it was one of those grocery stores I probably got a picture around here somewhere. Not of that store, but a store like that. One of those long, narrow buildings with a flat front across the top and a porch. That the old country stores they all used to look that way. Sit up off the ground on some kind of a foundation that would just sit there, pyramid-looking pieces of stone, and a lot of times had advertising painted on the side or various signs, Coca-Cola, Dr. Pepper, that kind of thing, mule hide, red man tobacco. You've seen those pictures of those stores like that. Well, they had one like that in Hergett. I don't know what the name of it was. Probably just the Hergett store, but it might have had another name like Midway or who knows. I don't know. That's the kind of a store it was. And in the back of that store, my Uncle Wesley had an office. And it was just one little old dusty room, had a desk in it, some other stuff. I was in there one time, and it was hot. Little old room had been closed up. Middle of July probably, maybe early August. I can't remember why I was even in there, and I don't know whether I was the only one in there or not. Uncle Wesley might have sent me in there to look for something, but man, it was hot in there. In excess of 100 degrees, I bet. And there wasn't anything real interesting in there, at least not to a boy my age. I'd like to go in there and be able to go back in time and go in there today and look around. But Uncle Wesley had an office in the back of that store. And just across there was I'm going to call it a road. That was a road. Most of you people wouldn't recognize it as a road, but it started out being gravel. The parking lot around the store was creek gravel. And the road started out being gravel and went between the store and the house over here, which was the farmhouse on Uncle Wesley's farm. That road went back there and it turned into a dirt road. And it just went out there into the cotton field. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but giving you the lay of the land right now. I already mentioned that as you're facing the store over here on the right side was a house, and that was Uncle Wesley's house, and I don't know, Uncle Wesley never, as far as I know, ever lived there. He stayed out there sometimes. And I can't tell you for sure who ever lived there, but I think Dad's brother under Uncle Wesley, J. Hughes, some called him, he and Aunt Molly and Bill, I think they lived there for a little while, but I'm not absolutely certain of that. And like I said, other people may have lived there, but most of the time the farm was just there, and Uncle Wesley went in and out of there. And back behind it was another building. Some people might call that building a barn. It's more like a, I don't know. At least one time that I was there was like a corral or a fenced-in lot next to that building. There was a pony in there, and we went there one time, and several of us tried to ride that pony. I don't think that pony was there the whole time that I was going back and forth to Arkansas, but it may have been. But ponies, me and ponies never did get along very well, so I don't have anything fun to tell you about that pony, except it was there. Over on the other side of the road that was between the store and the house was a big open shed. And in that shed were some farm equipment, and there were, I think, 6 John Deere tractors. There's probably someone that could tell you for sure how many tractors there were and for sure what they were, but none of that matters because I'm telling a story. This story's about my memories anyway. If my memory's a little faulty, it's a little faulty. I can be corrected on it, but I don't think anything that I tell you that's slightly inaccurate is going to affect the story at all. 6 John Deere tractors in that building. And they were usually parked there all in a row. Because when my family visited from Indiana to Arkansas, it was generally kind of a slow part of the farming season. The spring planting was over. The fall harvesting hadn't begun. And so there wasn't much need for any of these tractors, and so they were sitting there idle. And anytime you're out to farm, one of the fun things we did was climb up on those tractors and pretend that we were driving a tractor. I could, back in those days, make what I thought was a pretty good imitation of what a John Deere tractor sounded like. And we'd get up there and play on those things. All the cousins that were within a year or two of my age, older, younger than me, we liked to get up on those tractors and pretend like we were driving a tractor. And I think the one usually closest to the highway in the barn was a John Deere 50. It might have been a B, but I think it was a 50, and then a B, and then there was an A and a G and a one we called butane, which it had a big old cylindrical tank there in front of the steering wheel to hold butane, and the tractor, instead of running on gasoline or diesel, ran on butane. And we called that the butane one. And I can't say butane like my cousins from Arkansas did. They had a way of saying it that sounded different than any way I ever said it, but there was a tractor there. Can't tell you what series it originally was, but it was the one that ran on butane. How many have I mentioned? 50, B, A, G, butane, that's 5. Okay. There was one other tractor, and it was a duplicate. It was either an A or a G. I can't tell you which, but there were two. One kind, there was 2 of those, and then the rest of them were like I told you. And I can't tell you anything either about how big an A was or how big it, I got cousins down there to tell you all about it. They could tell you that how many horsepower each one of those tractors had, and they could tell you all kinds of things about them, but that's about all I can tell you about them. I had a lot of fun climbing up on them tractors, smelling the smells on the tractor and in that open shed, and That's one of my fond memories of Hergett, Arkansas, playing on them John Deere tractors. Another one of my fond memories is the store. And I don't know if that store was air conditioned or not. I'm going to say not, but it could have been. You know, this is in the middle 1950s, and air conditioning was starting to come out, and it was a big draw for lots of businesses. All the doors said, "Come in, air conditioned inside," that kind of thing. Something you just take for granted nowadays, but in those days, air conditioning was something special. And if you're in Arkansas in the middle of July or August, air conditioning, it was something real special. I don't think the store was air conditioned, but it could have been. But it was usually cooler in the store than it was outside, because if it wasn't air conditioned, they had several fans blowing in there. And they had some shade from the store being inside. And I liked going in the store, and I liked the smells of things, and I liked Dr. Peppers, and I liked dreamsicles. You know what a dreamsicle is? It's kind of an ice cream bar. I don't think it was ice cream. I think it might have been ice cream. It was pale orange on the outside and white on the inside. And I think maybe what it was orange sherbet over vanilla ice cream. It looked kind of like a fudgy or a regular, it's one of them bar on a stick things. Like them things. When I was a boy, we ate lots of those. They had another kind that it was in a cardboard tube about the size of what you find toilet paper on nowadays. It was in a cardboard tube and had a round stick on it, and you could push that ice cream out of that tube with that stick, and that little plunger was on there, and eat it that way. It tasted like a dreamsicle. It might have been a different kind of dreamsicle, I'm not sure. But it had those in that store. And we pretty much could go in there and get what we wanted when we wanted. When we were there because we were being entertained by Uncle Wesley. And it was a treat, you know, when we were all there together because there was a family reunion or a get-together or something going on over at the house and everybody was there. You couldn't just run over at the store and get what you wanted, because there's way too many of us for something like that. But when it was just you and Uncle Wesley, you were the cock of the walk around that place. It's just like just you and Uncle Wesley at the Jonesboro police station when he was chief of police. You were Mr. Mooneyham's nephew, and whatever you wanted, they were supposed to provide it for you. And it was that way with the store when it was just one cousin, maybe two. I remember one time Bill and I were there, and we had privileges. But we could go in that store and get what we wanted. And they just put it on Uncle Wesley's tab, and that would be the end of that. So that was a great place to be when you're 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. I liked that store. That store had a big old, I'm not sure whether there's a bread box or a cooler, or it might have been a bread box and a cooler sitting on the porch. I'm thinking that cooler was some shade of blue. But, you know, my memory's dim. I don't know whether it's RC or knee-high, or might have even been Pepsi, but I don't think so. Then there was the house, and that house was about the same size and maybe about the same layout as the house I lived in Indiana on 15th Street. A little bungalow type house with a living room in the front door, and came in on the back through a porch, and there was a kitchen and dining room and bedrooms in the middle of the house, and a bathroom in the middle of the house. But the real significant thing about the house was there were two lever action Daisy Red Ryder BB guns there. They generally were leaned up in the corner on the back porch. And I don't know why an adult like Uncle Wesley would need BB guns. Maybe he used them or had a use for them from time to time. I don't know. But when young boys were there, they had full use of the BB guns too. And much to the chagrin of many, many sparrows. There were rules about how you could shoot, where you could shoot, what you could shoot at. Couldn't shoot at robins, couldn't shoot at doves, couldn't shoot at mockingbirds, couldn't shoot at catbirds, but sparrows and starlings and them old grackles, you could shoot at all them you wanted to. And there wasn't many starlings and grackles around there, but man, there was a plethora of sparrows. There was big maple trees in the yard around that house, and they were just full of sparrows, and it didn't matter how many of them you managed to kill. It seemed like there were just that many more. And we used those Red Ryder BB guns to become excellent marksmen and hunters. And when you run out of BBs, you could go over at the store. They sold BBs over there. Get you some more. Uncle Wesley paid for them. Papa Mooneyham. I'm going to talk about him for a minute. He was my grandfather, my dad's dad. I can't think of a time ever that I had a conversation with him. In fact, I can't think of a time ever that he even spoke one word to me. So, those of you that know me, you know that's not the kind of relationship that I think Grandpa ought to have with the grandkids. And in my case, the great-grandkids. But that's kind of the relationship I had with my grandfather on my father's side. I really didn't know him. Really didn't interface with him. Really didn't have any experience with him. I can't even tell you for sure where we were. One time at Aunt Edith's, I remember him being there at one of the deals that everybody came to Aunt Edith's on Sunday afternoon because our Uncle Hollis and Aunt Mary and their kids were visiting, so everybody showed up over there, and we had a pitch-in dinner and homemade ice cream and watermelon on the porch and that kind of a thing. And I can remember one of the times that we were doing that, Papa was there. And I think there was another time, and I can't tell where it was or what the occasion was, other than it was the same kind of a thing. Papa was there. The most significant memory I have of him, and I can remember more detail and more about what was going on in this particular time that had to do with him. He wasn't there. And I believe this was at Hergett. I can't even for sure say that, but I'm going to tell you that on that road that went between the store and Uncle Wesley's house and back, and I said it, turned into dirt and went out into the cotton fields. I believe there were two small houses back behind the shed on that road. And I also believe that at one point in time they'd been Mexican houses. If you don't know what Mexican houses are, Mexican houses were crude dwellings, usually framed, about the size of a two-room house, and they had board sides on them, no insulation, tin roof, most of them had no ceiling, just the rafters, the walls, the floor. Sometimes they didn't have a floor. Sometimes the floor in them was dirt, but I think most of them I was in was had a plank floor in them. Well, I have to stop this story just a minute about Papa, because now that I started talking about Mexican houses, some other things came to mind. I got to tell you about Mexican houses. There were several of them around different places. I think there was one across the gravel road from, maybe two, from Aunt Edith's house. But a Mexican house was something that was described to you by the adults like this when you were a child. Don't go near that Mexican house. Any Mexican house. And then the description went on to declare that there were evil things in there. There were poisonous snakes and spiders. There might be demons. There might be lice. There might be all manner of evil, despicable, ugly, dirty things in that Mexican house. Do not go in it. Don't even go near it. Don't even try to look in the windows. If I hear about you getting even close to a Mexican house, I'm going to skin you alive and then whip you and then beat you half to death. How could you not go look in a Mexican house after somebody told you that? You had to go see that kind of stuff, right? Every Mexican house I ever went in was a disappointment. There was nothing in there. A lot of times absolutely nothing but dirt and dust and cobwebs. Every once in a while one of them would have a broken down bunk bed and rusty springs on the bottom bunk or something like that. Or part of a table or part of a chair. But most of the time, nothing. Nothing in there. And I went in one and looked around every chance I got. Well, didn't mean to throw that in here, but couldn't help myself when I thought about it. Mexican houses there was a time when all the major manual field labor was done by Mexicans in the rural South, especially the central South or Southwest. Mexican migrant workers came through and picked the cotton in the case of here. But for some reason, and there again, just like the tractors, some of my cousins could probably tell you exactly when it happened and why it happened and you know what this. For some reason though, that practice ceased to exist, and these Mexican houses just sat around and nothing happened with them. They were just there until the elements took them down usually, because they didn't use migrant workers to pick cotton anymore. I'm going to leave that and get back to Papa, but I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Those two houses out behind the farmhouse in Hergett, I believe at one time had been Mexican houses. And I never was in the second one, I don't think. But the first one, I was in it one day because Papa Mooneyham was living in it. And it wasn't like all the other Mexican houses I'd been into. It had been upgraded, had a floor. When you got inside, you couldn't see the studs. It actually had something to keep the wind from blowing through the clapboards. It had interior walls in it, and I don't know whether they were some kind of a wood panel or wood plank. They might have been that old quarter-inch thick stuff. It looked like cardboard. They put it up there with roofing nails, and it usually warped a little bit. Might have been that kind of walls. I don't remember. But the best I remember, it was when you walked in the door, you could see out the back door across the room, and over to the left was another little room, and I think that's where the bed was in this house that Papa lived in. And we were out there, and I don't know who it was. It was me, probably Lynn and Larry. I don't know whether Kurt was there at the time or not. He probably was, but I can't I just know there was 4 or 5 of us, and we were some combination of cousins, and we were going back there to see Papa Mooneyham. And we run back there, shouting and carrying on, doing the kind of stuff kids do. And we went in, and there wasn't any Papa Mooneyham. There was a table sitting there. It was one of them, best I can tell, I remember it was one of them little drop leaf tables, one that had them little shallow leaves on it. Most of them were, some of them were white, some of them were just natural wood colored, but most of them had some kind of a stencil paint on them when they were new. This one was far from being new. It was old and faded and well used. And those had little, that's kind of a set, had little chairs with them that came up like this and had a little narrow thing about where your head goes in a chair. Wooden chairs. It usually had chairs like that. You've seen those. You know the kind of I'm talking about. The chairs were gone from this one. There was 2 chairs there, but they weren't that kind of chair. They weren't the kind of chair that went with the table. They were some other old kind of a chair. They were in that main room there, and I think there might have been over by that other door going out. There might have been some kind of stuffed chair. I don't remember. And like I said, in that room off to the left was the bed. But no Papa Mooneyham. And on the table was a 5th whiskey bottle. Had 2 or 3 inches of whiskey still in it. It was sitting there on the table. And also was a glass about that tall. One of those thick, heavy glasses that a lot of people drink whiskey out of. And it was sitting there. And it had, I'm going to say, a half, 3/4 of an inch maybe, whiskey still in it. I could smell it. It's sitting there on the table. And some of the kids run in the bedroom and run out, and they looked around. Papa wasn't there. So we were all disappointed and went back. Back to the Uncle Wesley's house. But I had that day, and I still do, have the feeling that Papa was there somewhere. I had the feeling that he was hiding there, and I still think that. I think he saw these boys coming, and he hid. You say, look, that's a bizarre thing. Why do you think that? And I can't tell you why I think that, but I do. I think that. And that's my most vivid memory of anything having to do with him. I remember more details and more about how I felt about that day and that situation than any other thing about Papa Mooneyham. Well, sitting here wondering where to go next. 2 more things I want to talk about, or one thing I was going to talk about, another one that just occurred to me that I think I'll talk about now. My dad and Papa Mooneyham, his dad. They didn't have the kind of relationship that a father and son should have. I think it would be safe to say that my dad didn't like him. He didn't like his dad. That's a sad thing. Not only is it sad that it was that way, but it's sad that as a boy, I knew it. I knew my dad didn't have any use for his dad. Not because he said it. I could just tell the way he acted about him and around him. And I asked my mother about it one time when I was, I don't know, maybe a teenager, maybe not quite that old. I asked Mom, I said, what is it with Dad and Papa? She just said, you have to ask your dad. She said, anything that I'd say would be speculation. She said, but I'm going to tell you, when you ask him, he's not going to tell you anything. So I never asked him. I learned to drive on that farm. Uncle Wesley had a pickup truck. And I wish I could tell you what year it was. I can. It was a Ford. It was either olive green or black. It might have even been navy blue. But that's the order I'd put them in. I'm guessing it was olive green, dark olive green. I think it was relatively new truck because it was in that year span we're on Ford trucks. I can't tell you one model from another, but 56, I can tell you what a 56 would look like, and I can usually tell a 56 from a 55 or a 54 even, or a 57. So this truck, I'm going to guess, was a 57, maybe a 58 or 59 or a 60, right in there. But I don't think it was a 60 because I think I was younger than that when this happened. I think it was probably based on how old I think I was, 11 or 12. This truck was probably a 57 or 58. Uncle Wesley's truck. And I learned to drive in that truck. And learning to drive was more than it is nowadays, because one of the things that a lot of vehicles had, for sure, most vehicles, especially trucks, they had what's called a manual transmission. You had to actually shift the gears. Wasn't anything automatic about it. And you actually had to work a clutch, and took a little getting used to, took a little practice to learn how to do that. Of course, this truck was that way. And on that dirt road that went back in that field, and it didn't just go back in that field, it branched off and went, might have went around in a loop, I can't remember, but it for sure, you could make right and left turns out there to get to different places in that field. That's where I learned how to drive. And most of it was in one or 2 day period. And another thing that was going on then, and I mentioned that a lot of times we were down there, it was slack as far as farming was concerned, but there were some field hands that day. And after the Mexicans, then it became when you needed labor for the fields, what happened was you either went to West Memphis and hired them, or you knew somebody that brought them to you from West Memphis. And in this particular instance, that's what the deal was. Uncle Wesley had an agreement with a man. This man had a big, I say big, it's probably a 1.5 ton, 2 ton flatbed truck with stake sides. And he came about daylight with the field workers from West Memphis. And they were blacks. The field workers were. Now, this is 1958 in rural Arkansas, and I'd never heard them called blacks ever at that point in time. And maybe I'd heard them called field workers, but usually not. There was another word that they used in mine. That's the word my Uncle Wesley used. People don't use that word anymore, and that's a good thing probably. Or if they do use it, they're chastised for it. But that's the word my Uncle Wesley used, and he worried about them people. I think they were getting paid less than $1 a day, and they had to give part of that to the guy who had the truck for bringing them over and taking them home. They got there about daylight and they didn't quit till late in the evening. And they worked out there in the hot sun all day long, and I don't know what they were doing. I'm going to guess that they were what's called chopping cotton. And it took me a long time to figure that out too. In fact, I never did figure it out totally. Why they called it chopping cotton? Because you weren't chopping cotton. You were chopping weeds out of the cotton. If I was guessing, I'd guess that's what they were doing. There's probably a dozen of them. And me learning to drive had to do with Uncle Wesley could not stand to, he could not relax, he could not sit around and do nothing for seemed like 20 or 30 minutes without worrying that he wasn't getting his money's worth from those field workers. And he'd have to, he said, let's go check on the field workers. And we'd get in the truck and I'd get to drive and we'd go out there and we'd get out there to where they were and you could see them out there. Just every time we went out there, they was working like dogs. And he'd yell out the window at them or sometimes step out of the truck and walk out there towards them and yell at them about how lazy they were and how every time he come out there they wasn't working hard enough. And then he'd come get back in the truck and said, let's go. And I'd take off and sometimes kill it and sometimes not. Most of my takeoffs were jerky. And then I never could figure out how to shift the thing. One thing that sticks out in my memory, he said this to me over and over again. Luke, it's an H. It's an H. And it was an H. He's talking about the shift pattern. And I would think about an H, and an H to me was 2 legs and a crossbar, and I'd think about that. But I couldn't get it in my mind that you took that H and you turned it sideways and you tilted it, and that was the shift pattern of that 3 on the column shifter. But I hit reverse trying to go to second frequently and had all kinds of trouble learning to drive that truck. But that's where I learned to drive. In the cotton field behind the farmhouse, Hergett, Arkansas, when I was 10, 11 years old. I don't know how long this has been, too long. There's a few other things I could say, but I'm not going to. I think I'm going to pack it in here. Some things here I just want to get recorded for family history. Till the next time, I'm a hard times guy. You have a good day.